The loudest victory is the one nobody sees coming. Ariel Boone lifted her crystal champagne glass with the kind of smile that only came from believing the story had already been written. Around her, nearly 200 guests filled the sprawling lawn of Quentin Sloane's estate outside Savannah, Georgia. White tents stretched across the perfectly trimmed grass. A jazz quartet played beneath strings of warm lights. Luxury cars lined the circular driveway, each one more expensive than the last. Ariel loved every second of it. She turned toward the crowd, letting the afternoon sun catch the diamond on her finger before raising her voice. Some people spend their lives settling. I decided to upgrade. Laughter drifted through the guests. A few people applauded. Others exchanged knowing smiles. Several remembered the man she had divorced 3 years earlier, the quiet contractor who drove an aging pickup truck and rarely spoke about himself. Ariel had made sure everyone remembered him exactly that way. He actually said he might come, Quentin said with a grin, wrapping an arm around her shoulder. I hope he does. Every party needs entertainment. More laughter followed. Ariel smiled wider, hiding nothing. She had mailed the invitation herself, complete with a handwritten note asking her ex-husband to witness the wonderful life she had built without him. She imagined him arriving alone, embarrassed, wearing the same inexpensive suit he had owned for years. She imagined the awkward silence. She imagined finally proving she had made the right decision. Then something changed. It started as a distant rhythm that barely anyone noticed. A low, steady pulse rolled across the afternoon sky. One guest paused in the middle of a conversation. Another looked toward the horizon. The musicians stopped playing one instrument at a time until only silence remained. The sound grew louder. Heads tilted upward together. The unmistakable beat of helicopter blades echoed across the estate. Quentin frowned. Is that part of someone's entrance? Nobody answered. The aircraft emerged above a line of towering oak trees, black and silver against the bright blue sky. It circled once before descending toward the open field beside the property. Dust lifted from the grass. Napkins fluttered across the tables. Champagne rippled inside untouched glasses. Ariel stared without blinking. The helicopter settled gently onto the field as if it belonged there. The blades continued turning while every conversation disappeared. Every eye remained fixed on the cabin door. Then the handle moved. 72 hours earlier, Malachi Givens folded the thick ivory envelope and placed it back on the kitchen table without changing his expression. The handwritten note rested on top of the invitation. It carried only one sentence. Come see what you lost. Morning light spilled through the wide windows of his home overlooking Lake Oconee. The house was quiet except for the sound of footsteps racing down the hallway. Micah reached the kitchen first, still laughing as his sister chased him with a backpack hanging from one shoulder. Mariah caught up a second later and gently bumped him with her elbow. Dad, he promised I could sit by the window, she said. Malachi looked at both children and smiled. You can decide that on the drive to school. They accepted the answer without another word. That was how mornings worked in their home. There were no raised voices, no competition, only routines built through years of trust. Malachi poured orange juice into 2 glasses while the twins settled into their usual seats. Micah noticed the envelope. Is that another invitation? He asked. Malachi glanced at it for a brief moment before nodding once. Yes. Are we going? Mariah asked quietly. He did not answer immediately. Instead, he slid pancakes onto their plates, placed fresh strawberries beside them, and sat across the table. He had learned long ago that children deserve thoughtful answers instead of quick reactions. Sometimes people invite you because they want to celebrate with you, he finally said. Sometimes they invite you because they want something else. Micah looked down at his plate. Which one is this? Malachi folded his hands together. That is what we are going to find out. Neither child asked another question. They trusted him enough to wait. After breakfast, Malachi drove them to school in the same black sport utility vehicle he had owned for years. Teachers waved as the twins stepped onto the sidewalk. Several parents greeted Malachi by name. He smiled, wished everyone a good morning, and returned to his vehicle. His phone rang before he reached the exit. The caller identification displayed Cedric Holloway. "Everything is confirmed, sir," Cedric said. "The flight plan has been approved for Saturday afternoon." Malachi looked through the windshield for several quiet seconds before replying. "Good." Cedric hesitated. "Are you certain this is the right decision?" Malachi watched the school doors close behind his children. "I am not going there to prove anything," he said calmly. "I am going because my son and daughter deserve to see that dignity never needs permission from the people who failed to recognize it." Saturday arrived with clear skies and warm air drifting across southern Georgia. Malachi Givens woke before sunrise, not because he was nervous, but because discipline had never left him. He brewed a pot of coffee, reviewed a short list on his tablet, and closed it without making a single change. Every detail had already been arranged days earlier. At exactly 7 o'clock, Micah and Mariah walked into the breakfast room dressed in matching Navy outfits. They looked excited without fully understanding why the day mattered. Malachi placed a plate in front of each child before taking his own seat. "There is one thing I want both of you to remember today," he said. Micah looked up first. Mariah folded her hands quietly. "People will tell you who they are by the way they treat others. Listen carefully. You do not need to argue with them. You only need to remember." Mariah nodded. "Are we going to see Mom?" she asked. Malachi answered honestly, "Yes." She looked down for a moment before asking her next question. "Should we be angry?" Malachi gently shook his head. "No. Anger is heavy. We do not carry things that slow us down." Neither child spoke again. After breakfast, Cedric Holloway arrived carrying 2 garment bags. He placed them carefully inside the vehicle before handing Malachi a slim folder. "Everything is on schedule," Cedric said. "The pilot called 30 minutes ago. Weather conditions are excellent." Malachi thanked him with a quiet smile and closed the folder without opening it. There was nothing left to check. During the drive, the twins pointed out sailboats crossing the lake and counted hawks circling above the trees. They laughed over small things children always noticed. Malachi listened more than he spoke. He wanted them to arrive with peaceful hearts instead of expectations. 40 minutes later, they reached a private aviation terminal outside Macon. The building was modest, clean, and almost empty. A ground crew member greeted Malachi by name before leading them toward the aircraft waiting near the runway. Micah slowed his steps. Mariah reached for her father's hand. Neither child had ever traveled this way before. The pilot climbed down the steps with an easy smile. "Good afternoon, Mr. Givens. We will be ready in 5 minutes." Malachi nodded. "Thank you." As the crew completed their final inspection, Malachi helped both children fasten lightweight headsets. Micah looked through the window toward the open sky. "Dad," he asked softly, "what if nobody is happy to see us?" Malachi rested a hand on his son's shoulder. "We are not flying there to be welcomed. We are flying there to leave with our character exactly the way we brought it. That is the only thing nobody else can ever take away." The cabin door opened slowly. Micah stepped onto the landing skid first, blinking once beneath the afternoon sun before looking toward his father. Mariah followed beside him, her posture calm, one small hand resting against the railing until both feet touched the ground. Malachi Givens came last. He adjusted the cuff of his charcoal jacket, thanked the pilot with a quiet nod, and walked forward without looking at the crowd waiting beyond the field. The 3 of them crossed the grass together, matching each other's pace. No one spoke. No one hurried. The only sound came from hundreds of guests watching in complete silence. Ariel Boone felt her smile disappear before she realized it. This was not the entrance she had imagined. She expected hesitation. She expected discomfort. Instead, she saw confidence so natural that it required no performance. Quentin Sloan forced a laugh and lifted his drink. "Well, that is certainly dramatic," he said, although his voice lacked the certainty it carried only minutes earlier. Nobody answered him. Several guests continued staring at Malachi. One older gentleman near the front lowered his sunglasses and leaned toward the woman beside him. "That cannot be him," he whispered. Another guest narrowed his eyes before quietly reaching for his phone. Malachi stopped a respectful distance from the gathering. He placed a gentle hand on Micah's shoulder and another on Mariah's back. "Remember what we talked about," he said softly. Both children nodded together. They stood straight, smiled politely, and waited. Ariel finally stepped forward. "I honestly did not expect you to come," she said, folding her arms. Malachi met her eyes with the same calm expression he had worn since arriving. "You invited me. I thought curiosity might win." "It did," Malachi replied. "The children wanted to see where you were celebrating." Ariel looked at the twins for the first time. Micah had grown taller than she remembered. Mariah carried herself with quiet confidence that surprised her even more. Before Ariel could say another word, a black luxury sedan pulled into the circular drive near the reception tent. A distinguished man in his late 60s stepped out, straightened his tie, and immediately spotted Malachi across the lawn. His face brightened. Without greeting anyone else, he changed direction and walked directly toward him. Guests instinctively stepped aside. Quentin watched the scene with growing confusion. Ariel frowned as the older man extended both hands toward Malachi with unmistakable respect. "Mr. Givens," he said warmly, "I was hoping I would see you today. I still owe you my thanks for everything you did for our foundation last spring." Every conversation stopped again. Ariel stared at the stranger, then back at Malachi, suddenly realizing there were chapters of his life she had never even known existed. The older gentleman introduced himself only after shaking Malachi's hand. "Harold Whitmore," he said, turning briefly toward the nearby guests. "Chairman of the Georgia Children's Opportunity Foundation." A ripple moved through the crowd. Several guests recognized the name immediately. Harold smiled warmly at Micah and Mariah before facing Malachi again. "The new learning center would still be an empty blueprint without your generosity." Malachi gave a modest nod. "The teachers will be the ones changing lives." Harold laughed softly. "You always say that." Ariel watched without speaking. Quentin shifted his weight, forcing himself to smile even as uncertainty settled across his face. A woman standing near the reception quietly unlocked her phone. "Wait," she whispered. "Givens Infrastructure Group." The man beside her leaned closer to the screen. His eyes widened. "That company completed the interstate expansion outside Macon." Another guest overheard them. "I thought that was a billion-dollar contractor." "It is," someone answered from the next table. More phones appeared. Fingers moved quickly across glowing screens. One businessman lowered his sunglasses and stared at Malachi. "No wonder he arrived the way he did," he murmured. "His company has projects in 4 states. A local architect standing near the buffet slowly shook her head. "Not just roads. Hospitals, schools, flood control, airports. They have been everywhere." Quentin's confident expression began to fade. Before he could interrupt the growing conversation, another black sedan rolled into the driveway. A woman in a tailored navy suit stepped out carrying a leather portfolio. The moment she spotted Malachi, she walked directly toward him. "Mr. Givens," she said with a bright smile. "The State Transportation Board officially approved Phase 3 this morning. Congratulations." Several guests turned at once. One man quietly repeated, "Phase 3. Another answered before anyone else could. "That is the largest infrastructure contract awarded in Georgia this year." Ariel felt her heartbeat quicken. She remembered every moment she had once dismissed Malachi's long workdays as ordinary construction jobs. She had never asked what those projects eventually became. Harold reached into his jacket and handed Malachi a sealed envelope. "There is one more piece of good news," he said. "Yesterday, the board voted unanimously to name the Children's Scholarship Program after your late mother. We wanted you to hear it from us before the public announcement next week." Malachi accepted the envelope without opening it. His expression never changed. She believed every child deserved an opportunity, he said quietly. That honor belongs to her. Even the event staff stopped working for a moment. The applause did not begin because someone asked for it. It began because respect had quietly replaced curiosity. Quentin cleared his throat and extended his hand once again. I do not believe we have properly met, he said. Malachi accepted the handshake with calm courtesy. Malachi Givens. Quentin forced one final smile. What exactly do you do? A gray-haired engineer, standing only a few feet away, answered before Malachi could speak. If you have driven across southern Georgia in the last 5 years, he said, you have trusted something this man helped build. Quentin forced a short laugh. Well, that certainly explains the aircraft, he said, trying to reclaim the attention of the guests. Business must be treating you well. Malachi answered with the same calm voice. I have been fortunate to work with honest people. There was no pride in his words, no attempt to compete. That quiet confidence unsettled Quentin more than any display of wealth could have. Ariel folded her arms. You never told me any of this, she said softly. Malachi looked at her for only a moment. You never wanted to know. The sentence settled over the gathering without anger. Before Ariel could answer, a man near the reception quietly shook his head. I still do not buy it, he said to the guests around him. Money changes everyone eventually. Judge Ellison, who had been standing only a few feet away, turned toward him with a gentle smile. That would be easier to believe, he replied, if I had not known Mr. Givens long before any of these contracts existed. The group became silent. The judge continued. During the custody hearing, he never asked for revenge. He never asked the court to punish anyone. He asked for one thing only: more opportunities for his children to have a relationship with both parents. Several guests looked toward Ariel. Judge Ellison folded his hands. In nearly 30 years on the bench, I learned that character is easiest to see when people have every reason to choose bitterness. The skeptical guest lowered his eyes without another word. At that moment, Micah noticed an elderly woman struggling to carry a tray of refreshments toward an empty table. Without hesitation, he walked over and offered to help. Mariah picked up the napkins that had slipped onto the grass before placing them neatly beside the woman's plate. Thank you, sweetheart, the woman said with a warm smile. You both have wonderful manners. Harold Whitmore quietly nodded. That is exactly what I expected. Ariel watched every small gesture. There was nothing rehearsed about the twins. No audience had asked them to help. They simply did what came naturally. Memories returned one after another. School concerts she had missed. Weekend visits she postponed. Phone calls she promised to return later. She had believed there would always be another chance. Malachi had never argued about those disappointments. He had simply continued showing up every single week. Mariah returned to her father's side and gently slipped her hand into his. Malachi smiled down at her for only a second before looking back at the guests. No speech followed. No explanation was needed. The skeptical businessman slowly exhaled before speaking almost to himself. I was wrong, he admitted quietly. His success is impressive, but that is not the remarkable part. Harold heard him and gave a small nod. Exactly, he said. The remarkable part is that he became successful without ever letting success become the most important thing in his life. The afternoon settled into a quiet stillness that no music could fill. People who had spent the last hour talking about business deals and vacation homes now watched a different kind of wealth unfold in front of them. It was not measured by contracts or expensive jewelry. It was measured by the way two children looked at their father. Harold glanced toward the small stage where the master of ceremonies stood waiting with a microphone. Before we continue lunch, he said, our youth scholarship committee would like to recognize 2 special guests. The announcer smiled warmly. Micah Givens and Mariah Givens, would you please join us for just a moment? The twins looked at Malachi. He nodded once. They walked together toward the stage with steady steps. Neither child appeared nervous. They had done community events before, although never in front of so many strangers. The announcer knelt beside them. "Your father never talks much about himself," she said with a smile. "Can you tell everyone what makes him special?" Micah looked across the crowd before answering. "My dad always says that showing up matters more than making promises." He paused for a moment. Every school play, every basketball game, every parent meeting, he was there. Even when he had work, he figured it out. The audience grew completely quiet. Mariah stepped a little closer to the microphone. "He also reads with us every night," she said. "Sometimes he gets home late, but he still reads at least one chapter because he says people build strong minds one page at a time." Several guests smiled without realizing it. Others lowered their eyes. Mariah continued, "When somebody at school needs help buying books or lunch, Dad tells us not to tell anyone. He says kindness does not need an audience." Harold slowly removed his glasses and wiped one lens with a handkerchief. Even Judge Ellison looked away for a moment. Ariel felt every word settle heavier than the last. She searched her memory for moments she had shared with the twins during those same years. There were vacations she canceled, birthdays she attended only briefly, phone calls she promised to return later. She had convinced herself there would always be more time. Micah reached into his jacket pocket and unfolded a small piece of paper. "I wrote something for Father's Day," he said shyly. "Can I read it?" The announcer nodded. Micah smiled toward Malachi before reading in a clear voice. "My hero does not wear a cape. He wears work boots. He teaches us to be honest when nobody is watching and kind when nobody is clapping." No one applauded immediately. The silence carried more meaning than noise ever could. Ariel looked at Malachi through eyes filled not with anger, but with the painful realization that while she had been trying to build an impressive life, he had quietly built the family she thought would always be waiting for her. The applause gradually faded, leaving behind a silence that felt heavier than any speech. Quentin forced another smile and reached for the microphone. "Well," he said, clearing his throat, "I think we have all enjoyed an unexpected reunion. Let us continue celebrating." Before he could finish, his phone vibrated. He glanced at the screen and rejected the call. It rang again almost instantly. Then a third time. The confidence on his face began to crack. He stepped away from the guests and answered in a lowered voice. "No, that is impossible," he whispered. "We already announced the project." His expression changed with every passing second. "How much of the financing has been suspended?" Several nearby guests exchanged uncertain looks. Ariel watched him carefully. She had never seen him lose his composure. At that moment, two representatives in business attire approached the reception carrying a portfolio and several folders. The older representative introduced himself politely. "Mr. Sloan, we apologize for interrupting your event, but we have been unable to reach you regarding the revised lending decision." Quentin forced a smile that convinced no one. "Can this wait until Monday?" The representative shook his head. "Unfortunately, no. The review committee has suspended funding until additional guarantees can be verified." A quiet murmur spread through the crowd. Before Quentin could respond, a commercial real estate developer standing nearby recognized the documents. "Is this the Riverside project?" he asked. The representative nodded once. The developer slowly folded his arms. "I thought that deal was already fully funded." Another businessman quietly replied, "Only the first phase. The rest depended on outside financing." Ariel turned toward Quentin. "You told me everything had already been approved." He looked away instead of answering. The representative spoke again with professional calm. Several personal guarantees were included in the application package. Ariel felt her stomach tighten. "Personal guarantees?" she repeated. The representative looked down at the paperwork before answering carefully. "The documents indicate that both you and your fiancé agreed to support the financing structure." Ariel stared at Quentin in disbelief. "You never explained that to me." Quentin opened his mouth, then closed it again. There was no answer that could repair the moment. Across the lawn, Malachi stood beneath the shade of the old oak tree, helping Micah straighten his tie while Mariah laughed over a story Harold had just told. None of them had noticed the growing tension. They were completely at peace. Ariel looked from Quentin to Malachi and finally understood the difference between the two men. One had spent years trying to appear successful. The other had spent years quietly becoming someone people could trust. The expensive decorations, luxury vehicles, and polished speeches suddenly felt fragile. Character, she realized, was the only investment that continued gaining value long after appearances began to lose theirs. The evening sky turned shades of gold and deep blue as the celebration quietly came to an end. Tables that had been filled with conversation only hours earlier slowly emptied. One by one, guests walked over to shake Malachi's hand before leaving. They did not congratulate him for his success. They thanked him for reminding them what success was supposed to look like. Malachi glanced at his watch and smiled at Micah and Mariah. "Children," he said softly, "it is time for us to head home." Both twins nodded. Before they turned away, they thanked Harold Whitmore, wished Judge Ellison a safe drive, and hugged the elderly woman they had helped earlier that afternoon. As the three of them started walking across the grass, Ariel found the courage to call his name. "Malachi." He stopped and turned with the same calm expression he had carried throughout the day. Ariel slowly walked toward him. For the first time in years, she had nothing to prove. "When I invited you here," she said quietly, "I wanted everyone to believe I had won." She paused, looking toward the twins. "Instead, I realized I stopped showing up for the people who mattered most." Malachi remained silent, allowing her to finish. "I cannot change the years I missed," she continued. "But if they will let me, I want to start earning my place back." Malachi looked at Micah and Mariah instead of answering for them. Micah stepped forward first. "Mom," he said gently, "Dad always tells us that people can choose a better tomorrow if they choose it again the next day." Mariah smiled and reached for Ariel's hand. "Come to the community garden next Saturday. We always plant something that keeps growing after we leave." Ariel's eyes filled with tears as she squeezed her daughter's hand. "I will be there," she whispered. "And this time, I will not cancel." Malachi gave a quiet nod. "The future is built the same way every bridge is built," he said. "One solid piece at a time." Ariel understood that forgiveness had not been given to her that afternoon. She had been given something more valuable, a chance to earn it. As the aircraft lifted smoothly into the evening sky, Ariel remained standing beneath the fading light, watching until it disappeared beyond the horizon. She reached into her purse and found the handwritten invitation she had once mailed with such confidence. Slowly, she turned it over and read the words she had written herself. "Come see what you lost." A faint, bittersweet smile crossed her face before she folded the card and placed it back inside her purse. At last she understood the truth hidden inside her own sentence. She had never invited Malachi to witness her victory. She had unknowingly invited herself to witness everything she had thrown away. High above the quiet Georgia countryside, Micah looked out the window before turning toward his father. "Dad," he asked softly, "did we come here to prove them wrong?" Malachi smiled as the last rays of sunlight disappeared across the clouds. "No," he said. "We came here to make sure the people we love always know what the right way to live looks like. Everything else is only noise."